Good morning, Brad.
Good morning, Gary. How are you?
Very, very well. Good to have you. Appreciate you coming on. Let's do this again. 3 years in a row. Of course, the other two in the national championship game, Alabama and Clemson split the previous two matchups. These teams know each other well, of course, so as we'll get into it, a strong Alabama connection on that coaching staff, of course, headed by Dabo Swinney. But just some opening thoughts from you from the Clemson perspective on this game against Alabama in the Sugar Bowl College Football Playoff semifinal at the Mercedes-Benz Superdome New Year's night in New Orleans.
Well, first off, it's hard to believe. Thank you for having me, by the way. It's hard to believe that we're doing round 3 of this thing, but I guess you kind of wouldn't have it any other way with Alabama winning the first one, Clemson winning the second one. I guess it's the rubber match. And obviously it's back in the college football playoff, which I think is obviously a testament to both programs. But this was supposed to be a rebuilding year for Clemson. This was supposed to be the gap year between Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence. And Kelly Bryant has done nothing but come in and win nearly every game that he's started and has this team back in the college football playoff. I'm not sure anybody predicted that this team would be back here, but has built over the last 7 or 8 years is a team that's consistently going to be in the conversation. And Dabo Swinney says it all the time, and he said, the goal is not to win a national championship every year, but the goal is to be in the conversation at the end of the season. And you do that enough times, and you're going to win a couple of them. But they're here, and I think it's going to be an interesting game. There's obviously different players on both sides of the ball than what we saw the last 2 years. There's no Deshaun Watson, there's no Mike Williams, there's no Wayne Gallman. All those guys are gone, but Clemson's done it a different way, and so I think it's going to be interesting to see. To see what happens at the Sugar Bowl.
Yeah, no doubt. And you make a great point, Brad. And I've said the same thing, and I'm with you. I would have, coming out of Tampa last year, I saw Clemson and saw what they did in that game to beat Alabama and said, wow, what a great football team. Great year, national champions, but they probably won't be back in the playoff next year. But you're right. Dabo Swinney is doing it. He's doing what Nick Saban did, building a program. We see teams flash. They might have a great season with a lot of seniors or a great quarterback, and then they kind of go back to the 8-9 wins. That's not happening at Clemson. And I think you could argue, and I know Clemson people would be excited to hear this, Brad, I think you can argue, certainly Alabama for the last 8 or 9 years has been the preeminent program in college football. The record speaks for itself. But if Clemson beats Alabama in New Orleans and then goes on and defeats either Oklahoma or Georgia in Atlanta to win the national championship, that they will have supplanted Alabama as the premier program in college football based on production, based on getting it done. So this game is for a spot in the national championship game, but in terms of perception, it might be for even more than that.
Yeah, and I think, I think sometimes, well, first off, Alabama has done it for so long that I'm not sure that, Clemson all of a sudden just jumps over them and they're all of a sudden the top dog. But as far as recent history is concerned, then that you can certainly see that. I think it's going to be interesting because, obviously, they've both programs recruited at a high level. Alabama's top 1 or 2 every single year in recruiting. But what Dabo Swinney's done on the recruiting side, and even what's going to happen next week with this early signing period, I think I've read, and I'm not as big into the recruiting thing as some of these websites and all this kind of stuff, but I've heard that they may lead the country in 5-star signees next week, which are 4 or 5 5-star guys signing next week, which is it just shows you where this program is, and probably shows you the reason why, even after putting so many guys in the NFL, which Alabama seems to do every single year, is to put a bunch of guys in the NFL, and all of a sudden the guys right behind them are as good or better than the ones that left. And Clemson has started to do that over the last few years, and I think that's what's impressive, and I think that's also what's neat about these two teams again going head to head in a game, for all, where everything counts and the winner advances and the loser goes home. Absolutely.
Brad Fralick, our guest here on the Gary Harris Show on the Bud Light Hotline, presented by Adams Beverages. Brad is the sports director at WYFF Channel 4 in Greenville, South Carolina. When I was in Phoenix a couple of years ago, I saw the Clemson people there just thrilled to be, first time since 81 to have an opportunity to win a national championship. So much excitement, so much just glee. And disappointment in not winning the game. But at the same time, it was like, well, we got here. It was exciting to be a part of it. Great season. we're disappointed we didn't win, but, we'll be back. And they were last year. Last year, I got the sense in Tampa that this is our time. This is our turn. We're going to win the game. A lot of confidence from the Clemson people, and it happened. Now, as you said, going into the season on paper, maybe not supposed to be in this situation, but I've got some friends there in South Carolina, and I'm talking to Clemson people now, and they're telling me, hey, get out of the way. I mean, we're back. We want the spot at the table, kind of like you and I were discussing that Alabama's had, and I sense a lot of confidence from Clemson people, and even listening to some interviews with these players, that there's no more just happy to be there, no more awe of Alabama. We're going in there to kick Alabama's butt. You cover this team all the time. Is that kind of the feeling? Am I onto something here, or am I misguided a little bit?
Yeah, I think, first off, I think there is a respect for Alabama, and I think that's that way. I think it's that way all throughout the Clemson fan base. Obviously, you're going to have your outliers, but the majority, I think there is a respect for Alabama, and there's a respect for what that Alabama football program has done. But I also think with what the results have been in these last two games, that basically these two teams were mirror images of each other as far as talent is concerned and as far as results are concerned, that I just don't think, I think a lot of football programs in the country look at Alabama kind of up on a pedestal. I don't think Clemson looks at Alabama like that. I think Clemson feels like they're looking eye to eye across the table at Alabama. And not that they're going to win every time that the two teams meet, because they're both great football teams, but I think the way, just because of the results of what's happened the last 2 years, I think that Clemson people and certainly the players, I don't think they look at Alabama as a superior program anymore. I think they look at it as, we're literally just sitting on the other side of the table looking right at them rather than looking up at them.
For Dabo Swinney, and I knew him here when he was on Mike DeBosa's staff when I first got to Tuscaloosa, and great guy, and then got out of the coaching business for a while, and it's almost like it's fate. Tommy Bowden hires him, doesn't work out for Tommy Bowden, he gets the job as an interim. I think most people felt like, well, he'll hold down the fort until they get a real coach in there, and he just took this thing and ran with it. And now he's among the elite coaches. With all the Alabama connections, with him playing at Alabama and winning a national championship here, and all the different people on the staff, both on the field and in the support staff, do you think for Dabo it's still? I mean, obviously Alabama's the opposing team, but it's even more special to have won that national championship last year by beating Alabama.
Of course, yeah, of course, and he says so. Well, and I think as much as it is about him beating an alma mater and him beating, a place where he worked, I think he also looks at it as, we got there and we didn't take any shortcuts. We had to go through the best program to get there. And I think it's more that, or as much that as it is, the emotional ties of that's where he played, that's where he won a national championship as a player, and then to go back and beat that program. But I think he obviously modeled a lot of what he has done at Clemson after what he learned at Alabama. I mean, he says it all the time. He's a product of where he came from. And certainly he has his own vision, and he does it a different way. I mean, talking to him and talking to Nick Saban is a completely different conversation. But I think a lot of the ways that he has structured his program, and even bringing guys like a Thad Turnipseed and guys that were in that Alabama program, bringing them to Clemson to build Clemson's program, and taking a lot of those things that they learned at Alabama and learned from Nick Saban the way he built it. I think you can certainly see that all over Clemson's football program. You can see the Alabama influence. But yeah, no, I think certainly it's more special whenever you can beat a team that you played for and won a national championship. I think that's what's special about this Sugar Bowl. This is the 25th anniversary. I mean, you remember they were honored there on the field
right
in Tuscaloosa this year with that team, and then now these two teams are going to play in the Sugar Bowl. Dabo Swinney said the first time he's been back to the Sugar Bowl since 1992 when he won it as a player. So, and he even said they're staying in the same hotel, they're practicing the same facility that they practiced at and stayed in 1992. And he said, hopefully, it'll be the same result, but for Clemson this time.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of ties for sure.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty neat when Dabo and those guys came back for that 92 reunion, even though they lost the night before at Syracuse, and still kept his commitment to come be a part of that ceremony. Hey, let's talk about some personnel. You've covered what Kelly Bryant's done. I mean, obviously, Alabama's got to figure out a way to cover 13. I mean, Hunter Renfro's been the Bama killer the last 2 years. Your offensive line is really good. You mentioned Gallman gone, but you know, the running backs have picked up the slack there, and you've been productive. It's not the same kind of offense that it was under Deshaun Watson, but it's been solid. And Bryant's made enough plays in the passing game. He's certainly a gifted runner. Talk about this offense, how it's different from last year, but at the same time has been very effective.
You know, I think it's interesting because I think a lot of people look at this offense and they say, well, they're not throwing it around like Deshaun Watson, and Kelly Bryant isn't Deshaun Watson, so the offense isn't as good. I actually, you know, and I've kind of done this the last few weeks, just kind of glanced at comparison numbers because, well, that's what we do, and looked at last year versus this year. They're scoring less than 4 points less per game than they did last year. Last year, I think the Clemson averaged 39.2 points a game, and I think this year it's like 35.5 points a game. So there's less than a 4-point difference as far as scoring offense from what they did last year. Last year, they averaged right at 500 yards per game on offense. And this year they're averaging about 50 yards less total, but they're averaging over 200 yards a game on the ground. And so I think they're more balanced this year, obviously, than they have been in the past. And it's a different offense. It doesn't look the same with Deshaun Watson throwing the ball all over the field. Kelly Bryant's been effective throwing the football, but they've also established the running game against everybody they've played, and Clemson will rotate 4 running backs in. And Tavian Feaster is probably going to be the guy that runs out there first, but the Travis Etienne kid, who is out of Louisiana, he's a true freshman. He is an explosive playmaker. And then you've got the 2 veteran guys behind him. So they do it differently. But it's been as effective as last season. It just doesn't look quite as pretty with the ball flying down the field like it did last year to all those big-time wide receivers.
Right. And on defense, let's be honest, up front, I've said, you know, Alabama's faced Florida State, LSU, Auburn. They all had good fronts, but this is recognized as the best front in college football. And with guys like Wilkins, Lawrence, and Bryant, you see why. I guess there's some questions on, you know, in regards to the secondary. Maybe they're vulnerable a little bit, but if the quarterback's on his back, it doesn't matter. How good is this defensive front? You watched them all year.
They're really good. Yeah, they're really good, and there's no question about that. They're really good, and you know, this defense is giving up a touchdown less per game than last year's. So that shows you how much better this defense has played this year than they did last year. And a lot of these same guys were obviously there last year, but now they're a year older. But I mean, you're probably talking about, and it's probably similar to Alabama, you're probably talking about, you know, a couple of 3 first-round draft picks on that defensive line with Christian Wilkins and Austin Bryant and Cleveland Ferrell and then Dexter Lawrence, the big guy in the middle. So no, they're very good. They have dictated every game they've played in, with the exception of Syracuse, and Syracuse kind of got them going side to side, and spread it out, went really up tempo, and I think that hurt Clemson just a little bit in that game up there. But if you take that game out and look at what they've done the rest of the season, they've been completely dominant, giving up less than 14 points a game. I think it's like around 12 points a game. And so, no, they've been better than last year's defense, and I thought last year's defense was pretty good. So, they've been better, and I think that's why, like, the margin of victory this year is actually, strangely enough, is wider every game than it was last year, because the defense is playing that much better, and the offense, you know, while not scoring as proficiently as they did last year, there's not that big of a gap. It's only 4 points a game. So, yeah, I think they're very good, and it's going to look different down there against Alabama than it did last year, with no Deshaun Watson throwing it all over the field. But Kelly Bryant is a different type of quarterback. Kelly Bryant has a style that's a little bit similar, and he's not as big, and I hate making comparisons like this, but it's a style similar to Cam Newton, if that makes sense.
Right. Oh, yeah, I've watched him. I'm with you. He's a smooth runner. He takes those long strides. He gets to where he's going, and you look up and you think he's run for 5 or 6 yards, and it's 12 or 13. He's
right.
He's a gifted athlete. Finally, the 2 previous matchups in the national championship games were classics, instant classics, really. Any reason to believe this one won't go down to the wire as well?
No. I think this is going to be the same thing. I think this is going to be a back-and-forth battle. I think this is going to be two teams that nobody's giving up until the whistle blows. And I think it may come down to who has the ball last kind of a thing, like it seems to have happened the last couple of years. But I think I don't know that this one is going to be quite as high scoring. But of course, as I said, that it's going to be 50-49. But I don't think this one's going to be quite as high scoring, maybe. But I can see somewhere in that 31-30 range, 31-28. Somewhere in that range between these two teams when it's all said and done. And I just think that the gap between them is almost nothing. So to me, it's a 50-50 game. I can see Alabama winning it. I can see Clemson winning it. And I don't have any way to say, oh, well, look at this. This is why this team's going to win. I don't know how you can do that in this game.
Should be fun. I'll look you up down in New Orleans. Thanks, Brad.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me on.